All right, so let's proceed. So, ideally, what you're expected to understand from the mobile forensic process is to have a clear understanding of the process itself, right? And explain the main phases that constitute the mobile forensic process. As a forensic student, this is very vital to be able to define the phases and the guidelines, right? Because if you tell someone that you're a forensic expert and you can't tell the first process, or rather the first phase, the second, the third, up to the last, then that is not the best. And of course, you need to identify not only the tasks performed in each and every phase, but also the tools. I know we are going to look at tools, and actually, that one I'll give you as an assignment at the tail end of this particular discussion. We need to understand the various tools. There are very many, both open source and proprietary tools that we can always use to undertake these particular tasks. So, ideally, the forensic process that we're going to look at is based on the National Institute of, believe, Science and Technology, right? The NIST. So we are going to look at the guidelines because we have very many guidelines. So we are going just to use this particular guideline that gives us these four processes. Remember last time we mentioned about the various processes. So the one that's going to guide us, and even the one that you are going to be asked in exam, will be based on the four processes. That is the preservation, of course, acquisition. Then you need to do some kind of examination and analysis. Of course, you'll do reporting. Of course, the methods. Also, you're expected to know what they entail. So we looked at this, if you remember. So I've just added additional. Of course, we looked at the manual acquisition, right? Now, look at the second process. It is about acquisition. So that means all these acquisition methods are linked to that, to that particular process. So it's very, very important for us to understand the acquisition methods, because that's how we are going to bring the evidence to life. And of course, lastly, it's important for us to understand the emerging techniques. Not only techniques, but I prefer using technologies in mobile forensic. And of course, that will also be part of your assignment. You need to tell us some of the techniques. And I'll be very interested to see one of the techniques that actually has emerged in the mobile forensic. If you can report that, I'll be very, very interested to see what you come up with. Anyway, as I had said, what is a process? Yeah, before even talking about forensic. Yeah, so when you do something in a systematic order, step by step, then that will define process. So in our context here, these are the systematic approach that is followed by a forensic expert or other investigator. Why? They should be able to preserve, collect, examine, analyze, and finally report the digital evidence that actually involves a mobile device. Now, throughout these particular stages or processes, we look at sub-process, right? Because if you talk about preservation of evidence, how do you preserve evidence, right? If you talk about examining or rather acquisition, how do you do that, right? So, like I indicated last time, that personally I did computer forensic, but we are talking about mobile forensic. So they're more or less the same. The only difference between computer forensic process and mobile forensic process is the nature, the ubiquitous nature of this particular mobile forensic process. Because we talk about mobile, you move around with it mostly, and then it actually makes gathering of evidence a little bit hard. So also the process should follow a sound forensic process, right? So that you can be able to do some kind of auditing, record the chain of custody, and of course preserve the integrity of evidence. When you talk about preserve the integrity of this evidence, is that this evidence is going to be used against someone in a court of law, right? So it should be done in a very clean and clear way using these particular guidelines that you're going to look at. So what I've just mentioned is that this particular process can be actually we can borrow from different bodies, but we need to use one specific one. I think I'd made some mistake here. It's actually National Institute of Standards and Technology. I think I don't know which word I used instead of standards. Yes, National Institute of Standards and Technology, right? Don't know if there's a question somewhere. Is there a question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I kind of had someone like raising their hand. You know, I'm using the slide, so I can't really see what is happening on the other side. So if you have a question, just ask as we proceed. Now, so what I've said that we have many forensic processes that we can rely on, right? We refer to them as guidelines, right? So it depends with the environment. It depends with the kind of, let's say, just country that you are in. It depends with the nature of crime that has been committed, right? And more so, the policy, right, that you're using. Because if the policy states that you're going to use the process based on the NIST, well and good. If it says that you're going to follow the Science Institute, well and good. If it says that you're going to use the Association of Chief Police Officers, well and good. But in our case, we are going to rely on the one that is used mostly. And actually, most schools rely on it, and that is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So, like you'll realize that not all of them will actually help you achieve what you're looking for. So you need to look at the nature of crime or other incident that you are handling and see which particular option that you are going to look at. Like for example, we have the the chief police officers, right? Practice guide. That is, it is based on actually 4 phases, as you can see. It relies on the planning, of course, capture, analysis, and presentation. And of course, we have the European National Forensic option that relies on the 4 phases. That is identify first, acquire, analysis, and report. So all these guidelines are there, right? But what you are going to use is or follow is based on the what? The National Institute of Standards and Technology framework, which states that the first phase is preservation. And you can say preservation, you need to also do some tasks, like how do you handle the preservation bit. After that, you need to understand this flow. So after preservation, you do acquisition, right? And also there are some tasks that you need to do during the acquisition stage or rather phase. Of course, you have to know the device make and model, right? And to realize that we looked at the challenges of mobile forensic, and this is one of the challenges because we have very many mobile phones, so you have to understand the structure or the architecture of all these devices that you are examining in terms of the operating system and hardware. And of course, because you can't really extract evidence from a phone that you don't understand the architecture, right? So that becomes a little bit overwhelming, but you have to do it because this is your field. Now, we also have examination and what? Analysis. Now, these are two major words that goes hand in hand. First, you need to do some kind of examination, right? Of course, examination is where you have some kind of in-depth understanding of the evidence, or rather the crime that has been committed, and then analysis. So you realize that for examination, it requires a what? An expert, right? Whereas analysis, you can present that to someone to analyze what you have read, done. So you realize that you as an expert, you do the examination, then present this work of analyzing what you have already examined to someone else who has the analytical capability. And of course, lastly, within the NIST framework, you have to do the reporting. And realize that I say that when you're doing the reporting, reporting actually is linked to all these other phases, right? When you are doing preservation, you have to document. Acquisition, you have to document the tools, what you have used. Of course, examination and analysis also you have to document. So you realize that the tail end, you'll have to collect or bring everything into a report, and then it allows you to present your evidence. So let's first look at the first phase, right, based on this framework. Kindly take note of it. You can even capture the steps somewhere so that you don't get lost as we proceed. So we have the preservation. So evidence preservation. So this is a very first step or other phase in mobile forensic, right? So we need to understand what happens at this particular phase. As you can see, you have to secure the scene of crime, and then seize the evidence in a very secure manner. Documentation, right? So you can see also you need to document. Now, this documentation will help you understand the chain of custody. Yeah, chain of custody. I say that you need to understand who else is handling this case. What are the kind of, for example, personnel that were involved? Maybe who was being called, who is to report to this and that. So chain of custody, so that you don't miss any step, right? And as I had mentioned, you don't do this thing alone. So you require to have some kind of search warrant, and of course you need to be having some kind of investigator. So investigator could be someone who has the authority to proceed with the investigation, such as a police officer, CID or so, right? You should work with them. So you don't just, because you are a forensic expert, don't just go and start your investigation alone. You have to have an investigator who is going to help you do this. Now, as I mentioned, within the preservation stage or phase, there are a number of things that you need to do. So here is where complication comes in. So how or what do you do when you're preserving an evidence? So after you have the warrant to go ahead with your work, or with your work of securing this particular evidence. Actually, the first one is securing an evaluation of the scene. That's the first way of preserving the evidence. And of course, you have to do what we talk about, document the scene. Yeah, documenting the scene, right? I don't know, you guys, I don't know whether it's just by design that you're doing this as a subject, or it's a passion. Because when you are doing some kind of evidence collection, you need to have some kind of skills which I have not maybe mentioned here, right? So you have to be keen Of course, you have to be analytical. You have to be thorough. Yeah, of course, observation also is required. Yeah, just to facilitate your understanding of how the preservation, or rather how you're going to handle these forensics. Anyway, the third is seizing the evidence. How do you seize the evidence? Of course, the fourth one is evidence isolation, and then the last one is what? Bagging and tagging, right? Bagging is simply uh, having some kind of tags on the pieces of hardware, of course, labeling, right? And then you put them in the bag and so on. So maybe let's go through these particular preservation steps. I hope you have captured them. So first you secure and evaluate, do the evaluation of the scene and so on. So what do you do at this specific step or sub-step, or rather sub-phase of the preservation? So what you need to do is first to secure and evaluate the crime scene. Why is this process very important, right? Now remember, this is the first step towards preservation. So if you don't do it rightly, then you'll interfere with the entire process, right? You'll interfere with the entire process. So first, you need to prevent contamination of evidence, isn't it? Right? And also just ensure that you condone the area. You need to ensure that only authorized people and trained people are the ones who can access that particular scene. Just the normal, how the normal investigation normally happens, right? Then you proceed to document what? The crime scene, right? So here you can do some kind of recording. How do you document? You know how the kind of documentation you can do. You can even capture video, you can do some photography, right? But the most important thing is to concentrate on the crime device, or the device that has been used to do the crime, and that is the digital device. So it could be the mobile phone and so on. So what we need to do is to ensure that we capture or record any attached peripheral to the device, right? It could be a cable and so on. But most importantly, we need to document the status of this mobile device. Was it on? Now remember, this is documenting. This will help you in your subsequent what? Phases. Like for example, if the device is on or off, this one will help you understand which particular extraction method or acquisition method that you're going to use, right? Because if it is off, then you'll have to employ a different acquisition, as we are going to look at. Then the lock status, right? Is it locked or unlocked? Because this also is going to help you use the right acquisition option, because acquisition simply means how you're going to extract data from this particular device. So you realize that some devices you can now use some kind of, I don't like using the term, but brute force. So you'll use other methods such as jailbreaking if it's an iOS device, and particularly if you're using Android, you'll use some kind of routing of an Android device, or using some kind of USB debugging. Very, very important. What you get here is what will help you actually do the right forensics examination in future. The battery level. Why is battery level important? Why is data time important? Right? Because battery level, remember battery level, if it is 1%, it can change the the power status. So the first thing, maybe the other thing is to ensure that maybe before you proceed, as you're going to see, is to put it into power, so that you don't lose it, or you don't turn it off. and of course if there are some damages, right? If it's completely damaged, now you'll see we'll now look at another acquisition method, yeah, like the chip off. You remember we talked about the chip off, right? Yeah, so it will help you understand which particular option to use to extract data or rather information from that particular device. And of course apps that are running, remember these also can always change the evidence. We talked about this and we are still going to look at it. So that is the first. Then the second part of what? Preservation, of course, sees the evidence. That is the other part of preservation. So the third task is to seize the evidence. Seizing the evidence is to ensure that all the tangentials, I normally refer to them as peripherals, or rather equipments that are attached somehow to the main mobile device. So were there the data cables, power adapters, all these, the SIM cards, right, memory cards, all these, because these are where you're going to do the examination and analysis, isn't it? Right, like the memory cards, very very important, right? So you have to secure them. You have to not really secure, but you have to seize them. You have to have them, right? And of course, if it is if you can also look around, because most of us can always have some information maybe printed somewhere that can help us unlock the phone, for example, isn't it? Or even written passwords, right? So they can always help you. You can also even take at the diary, yeah, because someone can always have some phone books written in the diary that they have not saved, right, within their phone. So those can always help you, right, understand how you're going to extract or rather get data. And of course, in our last preservation option is to do what we refer to as evidence isolation. Now, isolation is kind of separating or rather having some segments of evidence, right? So we have two types of segments, or how we can isolate this evidence based on how the interaction happened or how is happening. Like it can be intentional or unintentional. You remember, I believe you guys did network security, and you are told that we can have intentional or malicious attack, right, to the network or to any device through hacking. That is intentional. Unintentional could be some activities like human error, right, or processes within a system that happens without your control. So with that understanding, therefore, the same applies to evidence isolation, like unintentional modifications. These are things that happen within the system, like application updates, right? They just happen. They trigger. There's some kind of triggers that happens, notifications, incoming calls, right? So with this one, we can always handle these intentional modifications. We're going to see how, to some extent, we can handle them, like the GPS location, cellular network. We can always handle these modifications, right, so that they don't escalate. Some, not everyone, not every modification. The other one is intentional modification, and this one becomes a little bit tricky to handle. For example, someone can decide to do something and then they delete it or wipe their memory, right, before, right? So when you get to the scene, you realize that someone has already deleted this and so, right? That could become that one could become very, very hard for us to handle. Now, when you're isolating these, I say that we can always handle those unintentional options. Like, for example, we can isolate the device from the network using techniques such as putting them on airplane mode. I believe you have handled this before. You don't want someone to sometimes to bother you, or you don't want, yeah, so you put your device into what? An airplane mode. Now, be very cautious with these evidence isolation strategies. Like, for example, when you enable an airplane, enable the airplane mode, you only disable what? The cellular network. Yeah. So when you disable the cellular network, that means if you are maybe associated with the Safaricom, in our case, I don't know, we have which one else, right? So that means data, outgoing data, incoming data is bad, of course, calls and messages, right? Right? And of course, Wi-Fi cannot work, and Bluetooth. But it does not stop the what? Global position system. Yeah, and the NFC. NFC refers to the, I think, near something. Okay, it refers to the RFID, yeah, the frequency, the radio frequency identifier, right? I'll get the right, you can even check for me right now. So, but it actually refers to the RFID, right? When you have devices that communicates using those particular chips, it cannot be stopped using the airplane mode. Let's look at the other strategy or the technique. Using a cellular network isolation card. This one prevents the mobile device from connecting to the cellular network, right? Of course, we have the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, but the RFID, GPS and RFID will still function under this method, right? So we are still isolating, right? So putting this device in some kind of protected bags like the Faraday, we looked at them last time. We also have radio frequency shield. We have the parabens wireless stronghold bag. These are kind of accessories that allows you now to handle the what? These strong signals from the global position, right? And of course from the RFID. We can also proceed isolating the evidence using the signal jamming, or rather jamming the device, right? So you have a strong signal that interferes or prevents the device from accessing any kind of wireless network. So as you can see, these are just some techniques that you can use to isolate the device from the network. We also have some strategies that you can use to, for example, isolate the device from these particular processes, like maybe application running behind the scene. But now this one will require a lot of what? Skills. Like I've mentioned that you can always brute force into stopping the processes. If it is a locked phone and you want to stop the processes, you have now to look at other strategies. So we have the equipments here that we have mentioned. So we talked about the Faraday bag. All this allows you to isolate the device from the network. So there's no outgoing call, there's no incoming call. Remember, when you want to analyze or rather examine your device, you don't expect to have some external and internal interferences. So you just need to look at what that particular device has at that particular point. And of course, there's this device here that allows you to jam the signals, right? Now, point to note here, when you are using these devices, it's important that you actually power or rather you power the battery, you charge the battery so that it doesn't run out of power, because jamming these signals sometimes brings, or rather consume, the device power. So you can see we have also the infrared, the IR. Last point, I believe you are following. I don't know if you're following. You should be writing them down somewhere. Is bugging and tagging, right? So preserving this evidence, right, takes 5 steps. Hope you'll remind me the first step, the second, and now the 5th step is bugging and tagging. Of course, you put them in a bag, you seal them, you package them properly, you label them, right? Don't just put things inside your bag without labeling, because if it is a phone that maybe someone used it to hit someone on the head and then it got damaged, and the different parts of the phone maybe scattered all over, you have to label them so that you know that this part belongs to this particular phone and so on. So we do this to actually handle a lot of things. Of course, prevent unauthorized access. We also preserve them for future analysis and examination. So we need to ensure that no moist gets into them, no fire, that they're not overheating and so on. Finally, what we need to understand is that after this, now the device becomes what? Forensically ready to undergo acquisition, right? We are now proceeding to acquisition. Anyway, maybe someone can help us answer this question very, very fast about the process. So we looked at several guidelines. You remember, I hope. We looked at the NIST guideline, which we are using. We also looked at the mention about the Association of Chief Police Officers. I don't know if you can remember the process of the Chief Police Officers guideline. Which one is it? Is it A, B, C, or D? Which is the appropriate guideline for the Association of Chief Police Officers if you're using their process? Hello, if you're there and you are following, which is the right answer? There are 4 processes. Which one was based on the chief police officers? Are you guys there?
D.
So they collect, document, report. No, not really. This one, I believe it was for the European. Anyway, it was based on the plan. Don't know whether you remember. It was based on the plan, and of course, you do the planning. With them, you do the planning, and then you capture, analyze, and do the presentation. Let's look at this one. Preservation. We've just talked about the preservation, and I told you that we are going to understand how to arrange them. So which is the first one when you're preserving the evidence? What do you do first? Let's move very fast. What do you do when you're preserving the evidence? Number 1, what are you supposed to do? What is the first step towards preserving any evidence?
To ensure the scene is safe, to secure the scene.
Very good. So number one, actually you have to secure and evaluate the scene. Very good. Number two?
You document
Yeah, of course you have to document the scene. And then number three?
the bagging and tagging.
No, that should be the last one. Number three is which one? You have to seize the evidence, isn't it? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you do the isolation of the evidence. And that's when you do the bagging and tagging. And that's what you have looked at in our last. So after you have done that, we proceed to the acquisition. Okay. I don't know why it's only one person who is answering, or it's only you who is in class. Okay. Acquisition, I normally like using the term extraction of data, right? Of course, it's a process of imaging. You can either talk about imaging or extraction of data. Now, this is a very crucial step or process. Remember, the first one was to preserve. Acquisition, this is where now you'll get the data from these particular devices or parts of the device. Like you'll have to extract data from the internal storage. We all know what the mobile device internal storage refer to here, right? So this is the volatile storage, yeah, like the RAM. Then you have the external memory card, which actually stores data permanently, which is like the ROM. Then we have the universal SIM card. We have two types of cards, universal, and of course you have universal SIM and SIM card itself. They both have different features, but what you're using, even your phone right now, is the universal, because it can even access the 5G network, right? So irrespective whichever card, right, you'll have, and that we are going to look at it. It's a very important topic, because remember, a SIM card has a lot of information from the cellular network. You call, it has the calls, it has a lot of identification. Like we are going to look at the various digits that are appended within the SIM card, like the IMEI, right? That's the International Mobile Equipment Identity. Also, we have to extract data from that. Actually, the cellular service provider, the carrier, right? And this is it is a bit complicated, but we have to use the authority to help you get this, because you have to go to the carrier, they'll have to give you permission, you have to have the warranty and so on. Then you have the cloud service providers. People store data in clouds, so you have to know how to extract data from the cloud. Now, all in all, the internal storage is very, very important. But remember, the data that is stored in the internal storage, if the power goes or if you switch off the phone, then normally we are going to do it, to lose it, right? So it's a very, very important. Of course, we have, when talk about the smartphones and the phones as a mobile device, they store their data in the internal memory, which comprises also of cache memory, right? And this storage, internal storage, we have the dynamic storage and the static storage. Those are just ways of understanding how we are going to extract data from the internal storage. Also, the hardware that you are analyzing, there are those ones that don't have, like for example, the external memory cards. Then we have the old, we call it kabambe here in Kenya, the feature phones, right? The feature phones that we used to use, they don't access the internet mostly, I believe, right? So also you need to know how to extract data. So I think the only way of extracting data is to rely on the SIM card and the phone books, right? Right. But with the current smart devices, you love to check up to the cloud areas. As I'd mentioned, doing some kind of acquisition within the cellular service provider becomes a little bit difficult, because first you have to request for permission or law enforcement. So there are a lot of people involved, right? But it's a very vital piece of component, or rather part of the acquisition, that you really need to rely on, because they are going to give you the call detail records. We are going to look at the cellular architecture and realize that for a phone call to be made from one device to the other, it goes through various base systems, or the data is stored routed from one point to the other. So it is only these service providers who will tell you where this information can be found. So we are going to look at that later on. Of course, the IP address location. Yeah, remember they provide some kind of list or dynamic IP address, isn't it? So every phone can be able to connect to the internet via the cellular service provider. And of course, the additional information such as the PUK. PUK is the personal unblocking key, right? So remember, someone might have decided maybe you tried to unlock this phone, or these are the details, right? And of course the SMS. So in Kenya we have well stipulated data protection law. So also you need to be working around the constitution in terms of the privacy, right? So as you embark on collecting this information, you need to have a lawyer who is going to help you work within the law so that you don't trespass. Because there's when you're extracting private data, we have to understand the privacy, because the owner of the mobile phone can sue you and things can change. Yeah, so you have to get the right permission so that you proceed with your extraction of data. So just like preservation, acquisition also, you need to take note of some subphases. One, the first thing to do is to do what? Identify the mobile device make and model, right? So you have to understand which device, and this is the whole thing that I was talking about. We need to understand the architecture of the phone that you are analyzing, or rather examining, in terms of its hardware, features, and software. And that brings us to understanding the what? The various operating system that runs the hardware. It is the operating system that handles the hardware. So you need to understand exactly the features of the operating system within this particular mobile phone. And of course, you need also to understand the features of the hardware, right? So this you can trace back from the manufacturer. You can check the website to give you additional features if you don't know, and so on. So you have to know all those form factors. Form factors simply refers to the motherboards, right? And of course the device label. Yeah, these are very important things that you need to capture, right? And of course we have the the electronic serial number, right, or the IME. This is very important. And of course we have the integrated circuit identifier, right? This is with respect to the to the transmission of electronic signals within these motherboards, right? So you need to know exactly the name, the number, model of the motherboards, and so on, and of course the SIM cards. Very complicated process. You can't do it. So you need to rely on the tools. That's why it's very important to understand which tool to use at any given phase. You can see there's a label, device label here, right? Normally under the battery, but it depends with the phone. Like this one, I don't know even it's which phone. So the second is to select the right tool. Very, very important, right? So the second acquisition step is, after you have known the device type, there's a tool that allows you to do that, right? And the tool here is the one that will help you to do the various data extractions, manual, micro read, and so on. So you'll see which tool to use for the physical acquisition. You also have the logical acquisition, and so on. Of course, the third phase within the acquisition is to perform data acquisition. Now, the data is a very important, let me just use component within the mobile equipment. So you can either do some live triage acquisition or post-mortem. I'll use an example of you as a human being. Wherever you get sick, you first of all, what you do is live triage acquisition. You go and see the doctor or the nurse. They ask you, how are you feeling, right? So they are kind of examining you at that particular point because you are alive. That's why you say live triage, right? So you're placed in somewhere, you're asked questions as a patient, isn't it? But let's say in bad luck, or by bad luck something happens, right? You don't go, or you have gone through this live triage, maybe you die and so on. So we'll go and look at what you said in a post-mortem, maybe to relate, to further analyze what killed you, right? So post-mortem triage acquisition is done in a lab, right, that is well equipped with all these tools, right? So it is important, the last point here, actually the environment where these things are carried. You see, live triage acquisition is what happens immediately when a crime is committed using that mobile phone. Like, let's say someone was calling, maybe they were doing some trafficking, right? Or they want to do some human traffic and they were calling. So you have to analyze that phone immediately, right? Especially you can do that in airports and checkpoints, border points, and so on. Anyway, there's a point that I mentioned that it's important to note that the data acquisition process is influenced by the device power state. If it is on, you perform what? Live triage acquisition, mostly. But if it's off, now you have to do some kind of post-mortem triage acquisition. I'm not just saying that you can always do this. Even live triage you can do if it's off, based on the memory, internal memory that the phone is using. If it's using static memory, some time you can retrieve volatile data. But if you stay for a long time, when the phone is off, then you'll have to do a post-mortem, right? So this is, I think I've already discussed this. So if your phone is seized, is actually turned on, then the device internal storage has to be what? Imaged or extracted first. Now, why is it that we give priority to this internal storage? Because internal storage is normally known as the working area, right? It is where the recent data has been stored. So it's very, very important to analyze it. And the worst part is that when the device switches off, it's very hard to what? To get the information stored in the what? The data stored in the internal storage. That's why we give it priority. So you have to image it first when it is on. But when it's off, you don't really need to check the internal storage. So you just have to look at the ROM, which is actually the external memory, right? For more information. And that's why it's always important to go through this step. So if the device turned on, if it is turned on, check the internal storage. Image it first, right? Image it first. If it is off, then you have to image the SIM cards before. Now, if it's turned off, the examination, or rather forensic analysis on this device will have to go for a post-mortem triage, right? So it'll take a lot more tools and acquisition processes when it is off, right? Because when it's off, that means you'll have to extract information from the memory in a very complicated manner, which is almost not possible. Anyway, so let's look at, okay, we are told to choose the correct. So in the evidence acquisition phase, the first task is to identify the mobile device. Is this a true or false? Is that true?
Yes.
It is true, isn't it? First task is to identify the mobile device, make and model. Examination and analysis, right? So this is a third stage, or third process of the NIST, right, framework. I hope you are still getting it, yeah, because it's very, very important. This is and once I'm done with this, I'll be through with this unit, because it's a very, very important. Because someone will tell you you're using this tool, which process are you using it on? Is it to preserve, to acquire, or to examine, or to do the reporting, and so on? So remember, this is a third process: preservation, acquisition. Of course, we have examination. And I said that we have two words here that we need to understand. So examination requires an expert, I believe, that works towards coming up with some kind of evidence. Yeah, so you check the deleted, hidden, where this phone was found. On the other hand, we have the analysis, evaluating whether whatever was presented makes sense or is relevant to the case. Because you see, once you bring everything, your work as an expert will to bring the whole material, but it's only the analyst who is going to tell you, now these are the what we require, right? So as I mentioned, examination process needs an expert, whereas the analysis process requires someone who has some kind of skills in analysis, can be able to interpret the findings, right, of the examination process. In this particular stage, it's important that any information be shared to the examiner and to the analyst, right, before any other authority takes over or start doing their analysis or other investigation. Timeline should be provided in each and every step, and this is what we refer to as some kind of chain of custody. You have to have some timeline based on how the various parts or the operating system, whatever has been brought forth to be examined. Why is it that this particular phase is important? Why is it? This is the entire center stage of the forensic process. So the forensic investigator should be able to formulate a scientific sound conclusion, right, based on what has been examined, provided, right, so that we prove the person guilty or the person innocent based on the what? The evidence. So what we're saying is that the right tools take time to do the examination and analysis stage. Then we have this question. The analysis process is conducted by digital forensic analyst, who is technical professional specialized in finding evidence. Is it true or false? Based on what you have said. Is that true or false? The analysis process is conducted by the digital forensic analyst, who is a technical professional specialized in finding the evidence. What do you think? Hey, what do you think? I've just looked at it right now. Am I alone in this class? Am I alone? People have left.
Yes, sir.
Let me check who is with me here. We are only two. Nambari. Tobias has left. Now, this process is very, very important in understanding the mobile forensic steps. Analyst should not be an expert, so this is false. Now, reporting. Reporting section or phase is the last step or stage, isn't it? Right? In the entire process. So it is actually, as I'd mentioned, it needs to be linked to the other phases. So you should provide a detailed summary of the previous phases, the tools that were used, right? Acquisition steps and methods that were used. Hypothesis that the investigator formulated. You see, hypothesis is an assumption that needs to be proven right or wrong. Like, for example, you might say, I believe based on this phone was used for this crime. So that is just an allegation or rather an hypothesis. But after you have done, so you'll see, when you're doing a research paper, first you formulate a hypothesis. The same thing when you're doing the examination, or rather when you're reporting, you have to indicate what the investigator had in mind. Then when the results are out, you can now make some logical conclusion whether the hypothesis make sense or they need to be removed, right? Actually, it's between you are innocent or you are guilty. So we have to do the reporting. We need to do formal written report, right? If we are analyzing or rather looking at criminal and civil cases, we know how to write a formal report, isn't it? Yeah, that one should not be. Then we have formal verbal report, which is used for testimonies. Yeah, so you can call someone to testify or to say something about that particular device or the communication that happened, right? Then you have informal written report, right? Informal written report doesn't follow some structure, but they are written. So they're often used for major administrative investigations. And of course, we have informal verbal report, right? Informal verbal report often used for minor administrative investigation. When you're drafting this report, be it written or verbal, we must ensure that they can be understood. So you have to use some non-technical language so that someone can be able to understand, right? So I think that is all about process. So you're told here, what does the formal report do or is used for? Any attempt? Formal verbal report. I know we are moving faster. So formal verbal is used for testimonies, isn't it? We have seen that. Yeah. What about criminal civil cases? These are formal written reports. So you need to know which report to produce at any given point. Then we have mobile forensics process is the systematic to dash collect dash and finally report. What you have just looked at. Yes, is a systematic to what? Hey, guys. Forensic process is a systematic to one to what?
Identify, acquire, analyze.
We have talked about to preserve, and we have looked at how to preserve, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So we rely on this. See, all right. Now let's look at the acquisition methods. I told you that acquisition methods is tied to the second process, which is acquisition. So here things should be very, very easy, right? So you need to explain the different types of acquisition methods, right, as indicated here. We looked at several, so I won't really take a lot of time here, right? So this is a process where you extract. I think you've already looked at acquisition. So you extract or rather do some kind of imaging. So there are quite a number of. Maybe we can start with the last one. Yeah, the micro read acquisition. Yeah, we say that this one is rarely used, but if it's a must use, then it should be the last of the options because it's very complicated and it is used to examine the structure of the storage devices, right? So mostly used in what? In post-mortem triage. Yeah. So very, very complicated, and it is used to extract data from the storage devices. Now, you recall when I mentioned that you can always use, if the mobile phone is switched off, you can always use some strategy to extract data from the memory. Now, this is the method, and it's very complicated, so it's always the last resort, and that's why in the diagram it shows when the phone is switched off, this option as the last one.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Before you continue, I'm confused about the answer you have given.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about, isn't the part for preserve, examine, and analyze a part of the acquisition?
Which one?
The last question that
The,
you have.
so what was your answer?
My answer was B.
B.
Yes.
Okay, yours is correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is correct, but now the what? The guideline that you're using is for the chief officers. The other one. You remember
Oh, okay. Yeah.
we looked at several, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that is right, but now according to that, now I wanted the one that now we have been looking at, the NIST, that is the
Oh,
National Institute of Standards and Technology,
okay.
which actually is a preserve, collective.
Examine it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry for about that. You are right, but now guideline is wrong. Yeah. All right. So uh, let's move on. Triage. I think we have looked at this because it's part of acquisition. So we just need to talk about it. We have seen why live triage acquisition is very, very important, and I'd mentioned that here is where you extract live data. Live data is that when the phone is still on, and more so it is used when you want to apprehend people who are carrying out some activities such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, right? Let's say when you're monitoring, when CIDs are trying to find out what exactly this person is doing, they can always go and apprehend that particular person and take the device, right? So that is the triage, the live triage, so that you can always see what was being communicated, what was stored before they actually delete those images, emails, and so on, right? So if you look at the last point, it is also commonly used during incident response investigations to collect volatile, yeah, that's what I've been talking about, collect volatile or critical sources of information, right? So volatile data means this data you can always lose it, right, if you stay without examining the equipment very, very fast. Then we have the post-mortem. We looked at the post-mortem. I know it's a familiar word. Yeah. So let's say the live didn't capture the right, and maybe for some reason you are dead, and you have to do the post-mortem to understand exactly if the communication is what led to what. If the information that you provided led to this, or we can unearth additional information from post-mortem. You see that things that you cannot get from the live triage acquisition, but if you go to the post-mortem triage acquisition, you can always get them. And for you see, just the same way, you see, when you go for post-mortem, you are now dissected, they remove part of your body and so on. That is exact thing that happens to the mobile phone. So use some kind of brute force way to get the data. Like for example, if it is if the phone, for example, is off, or you don't have the pin for that, so you can always use some kind of USB debugging, right? You have to enable this, right? You have to know the routing. I believe I mentioned this sometime. Routing for Android devices gives you the super admin rights, right? So it gives you the super admin right. Even jailbreak, of course, it's an authorized way of getting around the security features. So if they have the password and so on, you can always go through. Yeah. So it's a bit complicated on how you can do it, but yes, these are ways. I think the easiest is the USB debugging. USB debugging, you simply connect that cable, and it can always give you the option. Yeah. If it doesn't, you have to go to the settings. So USB debugging allows you to transfer, or rather access those particular files from Android devices. But if you don't have USB debugging, you can only do when you have the the administrative rights, isn't it? Or rather the right to access the device, not right, but the authentication right. If you don't have, you have to go the hard way, routing, and of course using the right tool. I don't know whether that makes sense, but yes, that's how we can use the charge acquisition option. Manual is the normal one. Yeah, you just go there and isolate the device, right? So it doesn't really require a lot of tools. You don't really need to. So it involves searching and the seized device for potential evidence manually without any tools, right? So you just do it manually. Anyone can do it, right? But I'm not saying anyone. Here you have to use the gloves, right? So I think here this one is based on the seizing of the device. Yeah, you can use this particular acquisition. And then you have the logical. Now, logical acquisition. You see, when you have the storage of device, normally we have those logical partitions. When you partition a device, and then you can install different operating system in those particular partition. One partition you can decide this is for different files and so on. So logical acquisition is actually to examine the different partitions and access the files from those particular storage areas, right? You realize that for you to use or for you to conduct this particular acquisition, sometimes you'll be required to use the application programming interfaces, the operating system. It takes us back to understanding how the operating system of this device works. Now, for example, if you want to examine how an email was transferred, right, or the various application softwares that were used, first you need to understand how they talk to the operating system through the API commands, right? So that's how you can acquire the data from those logical partitions. I know it's not really, there are those partitions that are unallocated, where data is not stored, so it's not really going to be easy because they're not partitioned, right? A partitioned space is one that you can easily extract some data from. Then we have the physical acquisition, right? So here is where you extract data bit by bit by imaging the internal storage. And we see that the external storage here represent the volatile areas, and we gave an example of what? Of a RAM, right? So physical acquisition is very, very important, especially when you are doing the live triage acquisition, where you want to capture the volatile data, right? Then we have the file. File is almost the same as the logical acquisition, but now here you have to understand the file system, how the files are arranged, right? And the files are arranged or stored in a manner of a database, right? So you have to know the file system. Normally, most devices, the mobile devices, uses the SQLite. SQLite is a lightweight database that allows you to store data in some structured way, right? So if someone deletes information, when you pull the information from or extract the information from this SQLite database, it can always not be easy, but retrieving this, now you have to do what? Use some tools, right? So the file system here can be linked to the database that stores this particular files, and the only database that I know that the digital devices such as the mobile devices uses is the SQLite, right? Now remember, different mobile devices have different structure, and when you talk about structure, they have different hardware and they have different operating system. So you realize that the tool that you use to acquire data from an iPhone will be different from the one that you use for Android. Kindly note that. It's very, very important, and that's what you guys will be telling us. Then we have the JTAG and the chip of acquisition, right? So JTAG, as you can see, refers to joint test action group. So this one is used, of course, to use some kind of brute force, right, to access communication within the various buses of a motherboard. Now, when data is transferred from the processor, for example, let me use an example that you can, let's say someone was using an input device, right, to send data to the computer, or rather to the mobile phone, and this, you want to track or trace the data, how it moved from the processor to the output to the display and so on, right? So you have to do some kind of analysis of the chip, or rather the printed board, which happens to be the motherboard. So this is a very complicated way of acquiring data. So ideally, you can use different options, as I've mentioned, like the jailbreaking, to understand how data can be retrieved. Of course, you can also use the various options such as routing for the JTAG. Now, most devices, they have the tag, the JTAG chip attached to the printed wireboard, right? So you can only just use it to on your lab when you're doing the postmortem, right? So you can always check the manufacturer of this motherboard, for example, the model number. Like this one, I can see it is from Samsung device, right? So it's a very complicated way of acquiring, and that's why we rely on the physical acquisition most of the time. Then we have the chip off. So if whatever you're using for the JTAG fails, you can use the chip off. Chip off is good for the devices that are damaged, to an extent that you can't really even power them on, isn't it? So what you do is to pull or remove some chip maybe from the motherboard. Of course, you can analyze the ROM, right, or the flash memory, right, for some information, but it should be the last option that you need to put into consideration when you're doing the acquisition. And it is best to use it when you are acquiring or recovering data from severely damaged devices. I know someone is going to ask you which is the right method of acquisition, or how do you retrieve or recover data from a device that is severely damaged. The answer is what? Chip of acquisition. So let's look at these questions. I know I promised 1 hour, but I say that this is the most important. This is a very important topic for this particular unit. So allow me just to finish it. All right. So in the live triage acquisition immediately on site, is it right or wrong? Is it true or false? Read that and give me the correct answer. In the live triage acquisition, the device is processed immediately on site. Is it true or false?
It is true.
Right, it's very true. Which of the following acquisition methods can be used to retrieve deleted data from unallocated space? I think I've mentioned that, though not in detail. Give it a try. Actually, the answer, they are all related. Just look at what is related here.
Option D.
Very good, D. Yeah, they're all related. They all require, in fact, JTAG, chip-off, and micro, these are related to the physical, and the physical here is volatile data, right? And once it is lost, then these others comes into play. I hope you get the sense. Yes, we are done. I can see we are done. We're almost done. That one, which of the following acquisition methods can be used to retrieve data from a severely damaged devices? Which one? Which one? Which of the following acquisition methods?
Chip off.
Yeah, good.
Chip off.
Yeah, chip off, I think, is the last one that you have mentioned. So, guys, we are done with the process, and that we cannot do any forensic analysis without understanding the process. So at least we know we are going, our analysis, if someone tells you to write a report or to state how you are going to proceed with your forensic analysis, or rather forensic process, you should be in a position to state that. That's why I've taken time for this. So if you can recall, right, we talk about how to handle the evidence preserved, how we can acquire that, examine, and finally report. Therefore, and in those 4 stages, we also have likewise the methods. We have the process and the methods. So we have looked at the various methods of acquisition, right? And within the processes, we have the different tools and sub-processes. Like, for example, in the when you're preserving, right, you need to know those, how you can preserve the evidence. I'd be happy if you can remember that. So finally, we have this activity. So I don't know, we are 5 in our class. That's why I've said there are 5. So you remember the last part I've not discussed, so I've given you as a question. So those who are there,